Hello and welcome to this QTheme tutorial. In this video, we'll be going through the grid options and highlighting the main function of each one. To find the QTheme settings, ensure the Kirki plugin is enabled. Next, from the WordPress admins menu, under the Appearance menu item, click the Customize link to navigate to the WordPress customizer. From there, open up the grid section. For starters, let's take a look at the grid control. The grid control allows you to build your site's layout visually and define its properties. On the top of the grid control, you will find buttons to add or remove columns and rows. Depending on the layout you want to build, you will be using these to add columns and rows where your grid parts will reside. On the top of each column, you will find a text field where you can enter a CSS value. The value you enter here will be used for the width of each column. You can use any valid CSS unit and the default value is auto. Just like you can define the width of each column, rows allows you to define their height. You can find these input fields on the right of your rows. To remove a grid part that is already on your grid, hover that part and you should see a trash icon. Clicking on that button will remove the grid part. Please note that the header, content and footer parts cannot be deleted. To add a grid part, click on an empty area on your grid. A drop-down menu will appear where you can select the part you want to assign to the area you clicked. Grid parts that already exist in your grid will not be selectable. You can only add each part once. If you want your grid part to span more than one area, instead of clicking on an empty area, click and drag the empty areas where you want your new grid part to be assigned. Hovering a grid part reveals any actions that are available. You can resize them by clicking on the grid icon, delete them by clicking on the trash icon, and you can edit options specific to that grid part by clicking on the settings button. To resize a grid part, click on the grid icon. You can then click on an empty area on your grid to move it there, or click and drag if you want your grid part to span more than one area. Each grid part has its own options that you can access by clicking on its settings button. We'll be covering the options for each grid part on separate videos, so if you want to learn more about them, be sure to check out the rest of the videos in this series. Below the grid control, you will also notice two more controls. The grid gap control allows you to define the gap between your grid parts. By default, this is set to 0, but depending on your layout, you may want to change that value. The grid container max width setting allows you to define a value that will be used as the maximum width for your grid. By default, this field is empty, but if you want to build a boxed layout, you can do it by adding a CSS value here. Just like in other areas in the QTheme, you can use any valid CSS unit. On the top of the grid section, you will also see a desktop and mobile switch. This allows you to define a separate grid that will be used for smaller devices. When you switch to mobile mode, you will see a control where you can define the mobile breakpoint. The value you enter here will determine if the visitor of your website will see the desktop grid or the mobile grid. Below the breakpoint field, you can select if you want to use a default grid for small screens or if you want to build your own custom grid. In most cases, the default value will be fine as we automatically do what is best for your site's SEO and content prioritization using a single column view. If you want to do something different for your mobile visitors, click on the custom switch and you should now see a grid where you can add and remove grid parts, reorder them, and build your own layout for mobile devices. With the click of a button, you can also copy the settings from your desktop grid, which will be particularly convenient if you've made a lot of customizations to the default desktop grids. You will also notice that when hovering grid parts on the mobile view, you will not be able to see the settings button for the grid parts. That's because the grid part settings are global and apply to both mobile and desktop views. In mobile grids, you will be able to add grid parts to your grid, remove them, reposition them, and also edit the grid settings like the height of each row and the width of each column. To edit settings for your grid parts, please switch to the desktop grid instead. Lastly, to make sure any changes you made are published, be sure to click on the Publish button located at the top of your customizer panel. This concludes our tutorial about the QTheme grid settings. If you have any questions or need assistance, please create a ticket and our team will gladly answer your questions and provide any assistance required.